Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim.
The words of the Prophet Muhammad are the second source of Islam. Without the Hadith, we would not know how to perform the prayer, how to observe the fast, how to give charity, or how to navigate the countless situations of daily life that the Qur'an addresses in principle but leaves to the prophetic example to fill with living detail. The Hadith literature is, in the most practical sense, the manual through which the Qur'an's commands become livable realities. But these sacred words did not reach us randomly, or by accident, or through a simple chain of memories passed down without scrutiny. They were preserved by scholars of extraordinary intelligence, dedication, and piety, men who dedicated their entire lives, from youth to death, to the science of collecting, verifying, and transmitting the words of the Prophet with a precision that has no parallel in the history of any other religious tradition. They traveled thousands of miles on camelback and foot, from one end of the Islamic world to the other, to sit at the feet of those who had heard narrations that they had not yet recorded. They applied criteria for authenticity so rigorous that a narrator's moral character, memory, and precise knowledge of those he claimed to have met were all subjected to examination before a single narration attributed to him was accepted. Today, we take a guided tour of the 10 most important Hadith collections in Sunni Islam. For each one, we will cover 5 essential elements: who compiled it, when it was compiled, how authentic it is, how many hadiths it contains, and what major topics it covers. By the end of this journey, you will understand not just what these books are, but why they are, and what it cost to give them to us. The first collection is Sahih al-Bukhari. Imam Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari was born in 194 AH in Bukhara, in the region of Central Asia that is now Uzbekistan. The accounts of his early intellectual gifts are so extraordinary that they read like hagiography, except that they are corroborated by too many independent sources to be doubted. As a young boy, he memorized the texts of major hadith collections before reaching his teens. By the age of 16, he had already committed to memorizing the works of Ibn al-Mubarak and al-Waqi in their entirety. His teachers in Bukhara recognized that they had nothing left to offer him and encouraged him to travel. He traveled to Makkah and Medina, to Egypt, to Syria, to Iraq, to Khorasan, and across the breadth of the Islamic scholarly world of his age. He sat before more than 1,000 teachers and collected from each of them. The numbers attached to his memory by the scholars who knew him are staggering. He is said to have memorized 100,000 authentic narrations and 200,000 others, with their complete chains of transmission, not just their texts. Whether these figures are taken precisely or as an indication of extraordinary scale, the testimony is consistent. This was a man whose mind held what an entire library could barely contain. One of the most moving details of how he compiled his Sahih is preserved in the biographical literature. He would not record a hadith in the collection without first performing the ritual bath, ghusl, praying 2 voluntary rak'ahs, and asking Allah for guidance about whether the narration met his criteria. This was not a scholarly exercise for him. It was an act of worship. Al-Bukhari spent 16 years compiling his Sahih, completing it around the middle of the 3rd century AH, approximately 846 CE. He began the project after a conversation with his teacher, Ishq ibn Rahwayh, who suggested that someone compile a concise, authentic collection of the Prophet's narrations. The idea, according to al-Bukhari himself, took root in him that very night. Sahih al-Bukhari is the gold standard of hadith sciences. Al-Bukhari examined approximately 600,000 narrations in the course of compiling his collection and, from that enormous body of material, selected fewer than 8,000, including repetitions, for inclusion. His criteria were the most rigorous ever applied. The chain of narrators had to be unbroken, each narrator had to be known for moral uprightness and precise memory, and crucially, each narrator had to have demonstrably met, not merely been a contemporary of, the narrator from whom he claimed to have received the Hadith. The Ummah has reached a unanimous consensus that Sahih al-Bukhari is the most authentic book in existence after the Qur'an. This consensus is not merely academic, it is a living reality expressed in the way the book has been received, taught, and acted upon across every century of Islamic scholarship since its compilation. The total number of hadiths in Sahih al-Bukhari, counting all repetitions and multiple chains of the same text, is approximately 7,275. Without repetitions, counting each unique prophetic statement once, the number of distinct traditions is around 2,600. Sahih al-Bukhari is classified as a Jami, a comprehensive collection that covers all major areas of the religion. It is organized into 97 books, each subdivided into chapters, and encompasses virtually every dimension of Islamic life, the nature of faith, the obligation of seeking knowledge, purification, prayer, the call to prayer, fasting, the pilgrimage, zakah, business transactions, marriage, divorce, inheritance, military expeditions, the virtues of the companions, the tafsir of specific Quranic chapters, manners and etiquette, the description of paradise and hell, and the signs of the approaching hour. One of the most celebrated features of Sahih al-Bukhari is the way al-Bukhari embedded his own juristic views into his chapter headings, sometimes asking a question in the chapter title that the hadith he then cites answers, sometimes drawing a legal conclusion through the chapter title that is not explicit in the hadith text itself. Generations of scholars have written commentaries dedicated entirely to unlocking the juristic genius of these chapter headings. The most celebrated of these commentaries is Fath al-Bari by Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, which runs to many volumes and is itself one of the monuments of Islamic learning. The second collection of hadith is Sahih Muslim. Imam Muslim ibn al-Hajjaj al-Kushairi was born in 206 AH in Nishapur, in the Persian-speaking region that is now northeastern Iran. He was a student of Imam al-Bukhari and shared many of the same teachers, a fact that gives the two Sahihs a deep connection in their scholarly lineage. He spent 15 years compiling his Sahih, a period of labor that, in terms of its intellectual intensity and physical demands, rivals anything in the history of pre-modern scholarship. Completed in the 3rd century AH, around 855 to 860 CE, roughly a decade after Sahih al-Bukhari was completed, the two books standing together as the twin pillars of the authenticated prophetic tradition. Sahih Muslim is ranked directly below Sahih al-Bukhari in authenticity, and together the two are referred to universally in the Islamic tradition as al-Sahih, the two Sahihs. Muslim's criteria were extremely strict, though slightly different from his teachers in one important technical respect. While al-Bukhari required that two successive narrators in a chain had demonstrably and actually met, Muslim required only that they were contemporaries and that it was possible they could have met, a marginally less demanding standard, but still far above anything that most hadith collectors applied. One of the features that makes Sahih Muslim particularly valuable for scholars is the way it is organized. Imam Muslim gathered all the different chains of transmission for a single hadith together in one place, rather than distributing them across different chapters as al-Bukhari often did. This makes Sahih Muslim exceptionally rich for those studying the variations between different narrations of the same hadith. His introduction to the book, a methodological treatise on the science of hadith criticism, is itself considered a masterpiece of the hadith sciences. With repetitions and multiple chains, approximately 7,500 hadiths. Without repetitions, roughly 4,000. If one counts only the unique prophetic texts without counting different chains of the same text, the number approaches 3,033. Like Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim is a Jami, covering faith, purification, prayer, zakah, fasting, hajj, marriage, business dealings, oaths, the legal punishments, jihad, the virtues of the companions, manners and etiquette, supplications and remembrance, repentance, the signs of the hour, and the descriptions of paradise and hell. The third collection is Sunan Abi Dawud. Abu Dawud Sulaiman ibn al-Ashat al-Sijistani was born in 202 AH in Sijistan, the historical region that straddles what is now eastern Iran and southwestern Afghanistan. He was among the most traveled of the great Hadith scholars, studying under hundreds of teachers across the Islamic world, and crucially, he studied under Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, the founder of the Hanbali school of jurisprudence, a relationship that shaped his approach to Hadith's relationship with legal practice. Abu Dawud compiled his Sunan in the middle of the 3rd century AH, and the book was read to Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, who praised it warmly. This is itself a testimony of the highest order, coming from a scholar who is considered one of the most exacting in Islamic history. Abu Dawud chose a specific and important focus, the hadiths that jurists use to derive legal rulings. He stated his method with remarkable candor. He acknowledged that his collection includes some weak hadiths, but only in topics where no stronger narration was available, and only after noting the weakness. He declared, "Whoever reads this book will have sufficient hadith for his religion." The great majority of hadiths in his Sunan are Sahih or Hasan, the few weaker ones are identified. For the student of Islamic law, this book is indispensable. Sunan Abi Dawud contains approximately 4,800 hadiths, a number that reflects its focused legal purpose. The Sunan genre is organized by legal topic rather than by the comprehensive thematic breadth of a Jami. Sunan Abi Dawud moves through the full sequence of Islamic jurisprudence, purification, prayer, zakah, fasting, hajj, marriage, divorce, oaths, business transactions, inheritance, and the duties of governance, and continues through chapters on manners, dress, the Mahdi, and eschatological themes. It is an indispensable resource for any student of Islamic legal reasoning, and its importance to every school of fiqh has been recognized across the centuries. The fourth collection of hadith is Jami al-Tirmidhi. Imam Abu Isa Muhammad ibn Isa al-Tirmidhi was born in 209 AH in Tirmidh, a city on the banks of the Oxus River in what is now southern Uzbekistan. He studied under Imam al-Bukhari, under Imam Muslim, and under Abu Dawud, making him a student of 3 of the 5 other compilers on this list, a remarkable scholarly lineage. He became blind in his later years but continued to teach from memory. Completed in the late 3rd century AH, after a career of travel and collection that took him across the central lands of the Islamic scholarly world. Al-Tirmidhi's Jami occupies a unique position in the hadith literature because of the way it is organized. After recording each hadith, Al-Tirmidhi grades it as Sahih, Hasan, Garib meaning, unfamiliar or strange, or Daif, and then often records the opinions of the companions and the legal scholars about the ruling derived from it. This makes his Jami simultaneously a hadith collection, a grading reference, and a legal commentary in one volume. He is widely credited with popularizing the technical category of Hasan, the intermediate grade between Sahih and Daif, as a formally recognized level of hadith authenticity, a contribution to the science whose impact on all subsequent hadith scholarship is incalculable. The book contains hadiths of varying authenticity, but Al-Tirmidhi's transparency about this makes it a tool rather than a trap. A reader who attends to his grades knows exactly what they are working with. Jami al-Tirmidhi contains approximately 3,956 hadiths, covering theology, all the major areas of worship and family law, commerce, inheritance, and the character of Islamic personal conduct. It is particularly celebrated for its chapters on the virtues of the companions of the Prophet, and for its chapters on the signs of the hour and the descriptions of the afterlife, material that Al-Tirmidhi gathered with particular thoroughness. The fifth collection is Sunan al-Nasai. Imam Ahmad ibn Shuaib al-Nasai was born in 215 AH in Nasa, in the region of Khorasan that is now Turkmenistan. He settled in Egypt, where he became the leading Hadith authority of his generation in that country, renowned for the exceptional precision of his memory and the depth of his piety. He did not marry more than one wife throughout his life, despite living in an age when polygamy was common among scholars of means, reportedly in order to devote all his energy to scholarship. The circumstances of his death are among the most moving in the biographical literature of the Hadith scholars. He was asked about Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, may Allah be pleased with him, and whether any narrations about Muawiyah's virtues existed. Al-Nasai replied with what the scholars of his tradition understand as an honest assessment of the available material, an answer that reflected his deep love for Ali ibn Abi Talib, the cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet. The crowd in which he was speaking, hostile to any expression of preference for the family of Ali over Muawiyah, fell upon him physically. He was carried out injured, and he died shortly after in Ramlah, in Palestine. The Islamic tradition regards him as a martyr. Al-Nasai first compiled a very large work called Al-Sunan al-Kubra, the Great Sunan, which contained a substantial number of hadiths, including some weak ones. When asked which among them were reliably authentic, he produced an abridged version, Al-Sunan al-Mujtaba, the Selected Sunan, which is the work known today as Sunan al-Nasai. This abridgment was completed around the early 4th century AH. Al-Nasai's conditions for authenticity are considered by many of the Hadith scholars to be the strictest after those of al-Bukhari and Muslim. Some scholars have even argued that Al-Sunan al-Mujtaba should be ranked just below the two Sahihs in terms of the overall reliability of its contents. He was meticulous in a way that was rare even in the company of the great compilers, and he included very few weak narrations in his selected work. The number of hadiths of Sunan al-Nasai are 5,761 hadiths, with notably fewer repetitions than most other major collections, a reflection of al-Nasai's preference for precision over comprehensiveness. Sunan al-Nasai follows the legal chapter arrangement characteristic of the Sunan genre: purification, prayer, funerals, zakah, fasting, hajj, marriage, divorce, business transactions, and so on. It is a pure Sunan work, extraordinarily rich in the details of legal rulings and in the variations between different chains of narrations on legal questions. The sixth collection of Hadith is Sunan ibn Majah. Imam Muhammad ibn Yazid ibn Majah al-Qazvini was born in 209 AH in Qazvin, in what is now northwestern Iran. He traveled extensively to Iraq, Syria, Egypt, the Hijaz, and elsewhere, in pursuit of narrations from the most authoritative teachers of his generation. Compiled in the 3rd century AH, roughly contemporaneous with the other major collections of this era. Sunan ibn Majah occupies a unique and sometimes contested position among the 6 books. It is the one collection in this canon whose authenticity is most debated among the scholars. Ibn Majah included a significant number of weak, daif, narrations, and some scholars have estimated that as many as 600 of its hadiths are weak, with a smaller subset being among the more severely weakened categories. This level of inclusion distinguishes it from the other 5 books in terms of overall reliability. However, Sunan ibn Majah also contains a substantial body of Sahih and Hasan hadiths, and crucially, it contains material not found in the other 5 books that fills genuine gaps in the Hadith literature on various legal and ethical questions. It was for this reason that later scholars added it as the 6th canonical collection, despite its lower overall threshold of authenticity. The guiding recommendation for readers and students is to consult the grading work of the Hadith scholars, particularly the classification work of Imam al-Albani and others, to identify the sound from the weak within this collection before acting upon any specific narration. The Sunan ibn Majah contains approximately 4,000 hadiths. Sunan ibn Majah follows the Sunan arrangement across law, ethics, and eschatology. It is particularly noted for its chapters on the virtues of good deeds, the stories of the prophets, and the vivid descriptions of the afterlife. The seventh collection is Muwatta, Malik, also known as al-Muwatta. Imam Malik ibn Anas al-Asbahi was born in Medina in 1993 AH and spent virtually his entire life in the blessed city of the Prophet, rarely if ever leaving it, in an expression of the deep attachment to the Prophet's city that characterized his entire scholarly personality. He was the Imam of Medina, the leading scholarly authority of the city that had been the Prophet's home, and the founder of the Maliki school of Islamic jurisprudence, one of the four major legal schools that continue to serve the Muslim world today. He studied under hundreds of teachers in Medina and began teaching from a young age, but only after being approved to do so by 70 senior scholars of the city, an indication of the culture of scholarly rigor and communal accountability that shaped his formation. He was known for his profound reverence for the Prophet, to the point that he would not ride a horse within the city of Medina out of respect for the ground that the Prophet had walked upon. The Muwatta was compiled in the mid-2nd century AH, making it the oldest hadith collection on this list and one of the oldest surviving systematic works of Islamic legal scholarship in existence. Imam Malik refined it over 40 years and had it reviewed by 70 scholars of Medina before considering it complete. The Caliph Harun al-Rashid reportedly requested a copy and offered to make it the official legal code of the entire empire. Imam Malik refused, on the grounds that the companions of the Prophet had dispersed to different regions and had taken with them different legal knowledge, and that what was established in one region should not be imposed uniformly on another. The Muwatta is not a pure hadith collection in the sense that the later Sahihs are. It is a book of law and practice, containing prophetic hadiths, reports from the companions, and the established practice of the scholars of Medina, which Imam Malik considered a living form of evidence for the Sunnah. The chains of narration within it are among the strongest in existence. The most celebrated single chain in hadith scholarship, known as the Golden Chain, is Malik from Nafi, from Ibn Umar from the Prophet, a three-link chain of three of the most reliable narrators in the history of the science. Imam al-Shafi'i, himself among the greatest scholars in Islamic history and the founder of the Shafi'i school, said of the Muwatta, "There is no book on the face of the earth, after the Book of Allah, more authentic than the Muwatta of Malik." This was said before al-Bukhari and Muslim completed their own compilations, but the statement stands as testimony to the extraordinary quality of what Imam Malik produced. Approximately 1,720 hadiths in the most widely transmitted version, the transmission of Yahya ibn Yahya al-Laythi. The Muwatta exists in multiple transmissions by different students of Imam Malik, and these vary somewhat in their contents and arrangements, reflecting the fact that Imam Malik continued to refine the work over the course of his teaching career. The Muwatta moves through the full spectrum of worship and law, prayer times, purification, the call to prayer, funerals, fasting, Hajj, marriage, divorce, commercial transactions, inheritance, jihad, and the manners of daily life. It also contains chapters on the character and personal conduct of the Prophet. As a legal document as much as a hadith collection, it conveys not only what the Prophet said but how the scholars of Medina, who had received this knowledge most directly, understood and implemented it. The eighth collection of hadith is al-Adab al-Mufrad, also known as the Book of Manners. Al-Adab al-Mufrad was compiled by Imam Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari, the same extraordinary scholar responsible for Sahih al-Bukhari, as a separate and entirely standalone work. While Sahih al-Bukhari covers the breadth of Islamic religious life, al-Adab al-Mufrad narrows its focus to a single subject, moral character and social conduct. It is the personal ethics manual of the greatest hadith compiler who ever lived. The time of compilation of al-Adab al-Mufrad was around the 3rd century AH, in the same general period as the major Sahih collections. Unlike his Sahih, Imam al-Bukhari did not apply his absolute strictest criteria to al-Adab al-Mufrad. The collection contains many authentic, Sahih, Hadiths, a significant body of Hasan narrations, and a smaller number that are weak, Daif. Imam al-Albani, the most prolific Hadith classifier of the 20th century, whose grading work has become a standard reference for contemporary students of the Hadith sciences, produced a classified edition of al-Adab al-Mufrad that identifies the status of each narration, and this edition is widely used by teachers and students who want to navigate the collection with precision. Despite its mixed authenticity, al-Adab al-Mufrad is among the most beloved Hadith works in the Islamic tradition, treasured for the intimacy and depth of what it contains. The number of hadiths in al-Adab al-Mufrad are approximately 1,300 hadiths, a compact but extraordinarily rich collection. Hadiths in al-Adab al-Mufrad entirely dedicated to the moral character, social conduct, and spiritual refinement that the Prophet modeled and commanded. It covers kindness to parents, the rights of children, the treatment of neighbors, visiting the sick, care for orphans and the poor, the ethics of hospitality, the manners of speech, the obligation of truthfulness, the virtue of generosity, the prohibition of backbiting and slander, patience in adversity, and a vast range of specific social situations in which Islamic character is expressed or tested. It is, in the most direct sense, a blueprint for a beautiful Muslim human being. The ninth collection is Riyad al-Salihin, also known as the Gardens of the Righteous. Imam Yahya ibn Sharaf al-Nawawi was born in 631 AH in Nawa, a small town near Damascus in Syria. He is one of the most consequential scholars in the history of Sunni Islam, a master of Shafi'i jurisprudence, a Hadith scholar, a linguist, and a man of personal piety so intense that the biographical literature describes him as rarely sleeping beyond what was absolutely necessary, fasting frequently, and weeping at night in private worship. He died at the age of 45, a lifespan by any ordinary measure tragically short, and yet he produced, in those 45 years, a body of scholarly work that has been taught, cited, and lived by continuously for 8 centuries. His works include al-Nawawi's 40 Hadith, one of the most memorized texts in Islamic education, Sharh Sahih Muslim, his celebrated commentary on Sahih Muslim, al-Majmu', an encyclopedia of Shafi'i jurisprudence, and Riyad al-Salihin, the work before us now. Riyad al-Salihin was completed around 671 AH, near the end of his life. Imam al-Nawawi compiled Riyad al-Salihin by selecting hadiths primarily from the most authentic collections, principally Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, supplemented by the 4 Sunan and other reliable sources. The overwhelming majority of its contents are Sahih or Hasan. He deliberately selected hadiths that were clear, accessible, and directly relevant to the spiritual and moral cultivation of the believer, not primarily hadiths of interest to legal specialists but hadiths that every Muslim, regardless of their level of scholarly training, could read, understand, and immediately apply. The book is trusted and taught across all 4 major schools of jurisprudence and across every part of the Muslim world. The number of hadiths contained in Riyad al-Salihin are approximately 1,900 hadiths, arranged into thematic chapters with Quranic verses placed at the opening of each chapter to provide the scriptural foundation for the theme that follows. Riyad al-Salihin is a spiritual and ethical manual for the everyday Muslim. It opens with the fundamental dispositions of the interior life, sincerity of intention, repentance, patience, truthfulness, vigilance over the soul, God consciousness, taqwa, certainty, and hope in Allah's mercy, before moving outward to the social and physical dimensions of Islamic practice, the etiquette of eating, dress, and sleep, the manners of daily interaction, the virtues of charity and remembrance, the prohibition of backbiting and envy, and the remembrance of death and the afterlife. It is a book designed not merely to be read but to be lived, to sit on the bedside table of a Muslim home and to be opened a little every day. The 10th collection of Hadith is al-Shama'il al-Muhammadiyah, which means the prophetic characteristics. Al-Shama'il al-Muhammadiyah was compiled by Imam Abu Isa Muhammad al-Tirmidhi, the same master who gave us Jami, al-Tirmidhi, as a separate, focused, standalone work with a single and deeply personal purpose, to gather, in one place, every description of the Prophet, his appearance, his manners, his daily life, his worship, that had been transmitted through the Hadith literature, so that the reader could encounter the Prophet as intimately and vividly as a text can allow. The time of compilation that took al-Shama'il al-Muhammadiyah is around the 3rd century AH, composed in the same fertile period of Islamic scholarship that produced the major Sunan collections. Al-Tirmidhi applied his usual methodology of classification and transparency. The collection contains primarily Sahih and Hasan Hadiths, with a small number of narrations that are less strongly authenticated. Scholars have noted that al-Shama'il is, overall, a highly reliable and carefully constructed collection. Later scholars have produced graded editions to assist students in navigating the minority of weaker narrations within it. The number of hadiths in al-Shama'il al-Muhammadiyah are just under 400 hadiths, many of them remarkably short, intimate, and vivid in the specific detail they preserve. Al-Shama'il is unique among the collections on this list in its exclusive focus. It contains no rulings, no chapters on jurisprudence, no discussions of theological controversy. Its entire content is devoted to a single subject, the person of the Prophet Muhammad. Chapter by chapter, it describes his physical appearance, his height and build, the color of his complexion, the quality of his hair, the seal of prophethood between his shoulders, his manner of walking, described as purposeful and forward-leaning, as though descending a slope, his manner of speech, measured, clear, never hasty, his smile, his laughter, what he ate and how he ate, his clothing and sandals, his ring and how he wore it, his fasting beyond what was obligatory, his night worship, and the humble simplicity of his household and its furnishings. To read al-Shama'il is, as the scholars have always said, to fall in love with the Prophet, not with an abstract figure from history, but with a man so specifically described, so recognizably human in his tastes and habits and in the particular qualities of his presence, that the reader feels they have almost met him. 10 collections, 10 compilers who gave their entire lives to a single purpose, that the words of the Prophet should reach us correctly, precisely, and with the evidence for their authenticity laid out in transparent detail so that every generation could verify for itself what it was receiving. The two Sahihs of al-Bukhari and Muslim are the unshakable twin pillars of authentic prophetic transmission, the bedrock upon which every other hadith-based argument, ruling, and understanding rests. The 4 Sunan of Abu Dawud, al-Tirmidhi, al-Nasai, and Ibn Majah are the great legal treasuries of the prophetic tradition, the places where Islamic jurisprudence finds the specific, detailed prophetic guidance it needs to translate Quranic principle into lived practice. The Muwatta of Imam Malik is the oldest and most living record of how the scholars of the Prophet's own city understood and applied what they had received from those who came before them. Al-Adab al-Mufrad is the manual of Islamic character. Riyad al-Salihin is the garden of the everyday soul, the book designed to be read a little every day until its wisdom becomes the natural texture of a believer's inner life. And al-Shama'il al-Muhammadiyah brings the Prophet into the home, not as a distant figure of religious history, but as a man whose laugh and walk and food preferences and night prayers are described in enough detail to make the heart ache with love. These 10 compilers were not academics in any modern sense of that word. They were people of the night prayer, of sustained voluntary fasting, of tears shed in private before their Lord. They understood that what they were doing was not scholarship for its own sake but an act of preservation that every Muslim of every subsequent generation would depend on. They were the stewards of a trust, and they guarded it at the cost of their entire lives. Our part is smaller and simpler. Open these books, read them, let the words of the Prophet, verified and transmitted at such incalculable cost, shape the heart and the life and the character of the person who receives them. May Allah have mercy on these great Imams, elevate their ranks in the highest gardens of paradise, and gather us with them in the company of the one whose words they sacrificed everything to preserve. Amin, and Allah knows best.